Hello everyone, welcome back to the YouTube channel. My name is Mike and today we're continuing with Sabaton week and we're having a look at Shiroyama. So this is Shiroyama. I know a little bit about this, but it's kind of almost passing knowledge about Shiroyama. The only thing that I really kind of can concrete know is that it was kind of the cumulative battle of the Satsuma rebellion, and even that I kind of only know in passing. From my knowledge that I know of it, the Satsuma rebellion was kind of an armed uprising against the Japanese kind of imperial government, from samurai who were kind of disgruntled with the way that Japanese society was going. They didn't like how fast Japan was modernizing, and to a large extent they didn't actually enjoy a lot of their privileges that they seemed to be taking away from them. I just want to caveat that as well with what I know is that this wasn't all samurai. A lot of samurai also fought on the imperial side and kind of embraced the change that they were part of, but that's kind of the highlight of what I know. I just know that Shiroyama was kind of the final culminative battle of the Satsuma rebellion, and kind of brought an end to the traditional samurai way of life. But that's kind of, I only know that as a passing mention from various books and things that I've seen over the years. So I'm looking forward to checking this one out. So I assume that's the end of the first verse and chorus right there. And so quickly just saying there, I assume all of you know who the samurai was, but just in case you don't, the samurai were kind of the Japanese equivalents to kind of medieval knights, similar to, as it said, Bushido. Bushido was almost like the code of honor, the code of conduct for Japanese samurai, in a way that would be comparable to the code of chivalry for European knights. But in essentially away from a kind of romanticized version of that is, in essence, the knights and samurai themselves are kind of a class of people, usually somewhat of landowners, who were warriors, and they had certain rights and privileges, and they would be the ones who would fight in wars, who would, kind of maintain an order over their domain, so to speak, and keep that going forward there. And as they said, with the imperial defined, rather, the whole idea of the imperial being defined is the imperial was the emperor. And what you need to know, basically, this is my rudimentary understanding of Japanese kind of feudal history, if you will, and going forward. I only really know Japanese history kind of into the 20th century properly. But the whole idea of this was, for a long time, Japan was embroiled in a series of destructive civil wars known as Sengoku Judidai, where essentially warlords after warlords would fight against each other to try and basically become the daimyo, the kind of de facto ruler of Japan. And eventually Japan was kind of somewhat united under Tokugawa Ieyasu. And he basically carried out an order that any foreigner wasn't to land on the Japanese islands, and no Japanese was to leave. And so that meant that for an extreme large amount of time, Japan was kind of isolated from the rest of the world. And then eventually the Americans turned up, and basically demanded that the Japanese open their ports. And they, bearing in mind the Japanese, again, still relatively cut off from the outside world, continued much of the way that they've done. And then suddenly you have these ships of the line, these modern American kind of ships with cannons and stuff like that turn up and basically say, open your country or not. And there was a debate to be had in Japan whether the Japanese were to meet the Americans in war or whether they would kind of open their ports and kind of allow themselves to be identified by kind of that Western kind of influence, if you will. And it must be said, a lot of the kind of the foreign powers that would come to Japan's reopening kind of enforced extremely unsided or one-sided trade deals and stuff like that were quite embarrassing to a lot of the Japanese. And again, as I said, I apologize, this is only rudimentary knowledge that I have. But eventually, as this was happening, the Japanese samurai class found themselves increasingly kind of being left behind as Japan was modernizing. Previously, the kind of Japanese caste structure, merchants and stuff like that were kind of below them. And now suddenly with the ports open and stuff like that, and foreign trade, merchants suddenly found themselves becoming increasingly powerful or influential within Japan's hierarchy. Meanwhile, the samurai were kind of being left behind by their virtue. They couldn't take up any other profession because they were warriors. That was their role, that was their class. And so, for one, when you've had internal peace, you kind of don't have much to do. I believe a lot of samurai and stuff like that were pushing for Japanese war against Korea around this time as well. And so, yeah, they was kind of struggling with finding their place. And as things were changing, the samurai became more and more kind of less important, I suppose, in Japanese society in that way. And, as they said, they weren't too happy about it, and that led to conflict. So we'll see where the second verse takes us.
As a new age begins, the way of the warrior comes to an end. As a new age begins, the ways of old must apprehend. It's the nature of time that the old ways must give in. It's the nature of time that the new ways comes in sin. An offer of surrender, say go ignore contender. The dawn of destiny is here. Imperial force defiled, facing 500 samurai. Surrounded and outnumbered, takes me to one, the sword face the gun. Bushido, dignified, it's the last stand of the samurai. Surrounded and outnumbered.
But yeah, I'll just give that a pause there quick, just because that little verse reminded me of something. And that is, I'm pretty sure the film The Last Samurai, starring Tom Cruise, is supposed to kind of be based around the history of the Satsuma Rebellion, or certainly use it as inspiration, this whole kind of idea of the old way of the samurai, the traditional samurai, against kind of the modern era, if you will. But yeah, so I couldn't remember, and I didn't know who the leader of the Satsuma Rebellion is, but I heard they say Saigo, which I assume must be the kind of the leader of this rebellion. But similar to what I've done with the Ghosts in the Trenches, because I don't know about this event, I will be checking out the Sabaton history, and so I can learn about that. And I hope, again, you guys come along with me for the journey for that. But yeah, so what I do know, again, this rudimental understanding of Japanese history, which I need to apologize for a little bit again, is but I do know that Satsuma, kind of that Satsuma province and stuff like that, were important and influential figures within Japanese history. They were a major player during the Sengoku Jidai, and there was also an important kind of factor in the Boshin War, where kind of the Imperials against the Shogunate forces, where the Imperials actually ended up winning out. But yeah.
Till the dawn they hold on, only 40 are left
Okay. Oh, whoops. Didn't mean to replay that. But yeah, I didn't know if there was going to be any like little information at the end there. But yeah, so that's been Shiroyama. So by the sounds of it, they all died. They died to a man. Again, I need to understand whether they all died in battle or whether they done the practice of seppuku, which was the kind of death before dishonor, the kind of a ritual type of suicide. So I need to find out a little bit more about that, whether they actually fought to the last or whether those that remained chose to take their own lives. But yeah, so Shiroyama, again, as I said, I don't have a fully understanding of Japanese history, but it was kind of the end of traditional samurai, I suppose. And yeah, as I said, kind of as modern ways kind of improve, that kind of culture, that past way of doing things kind of dies. And I suppose to a larger extent that's true. It's the same reason why knights weren't a thing. Knights dominated things for centuries and then disappeared as times improved. Cavalry as a whole, kind of that whole type of thing, and the samurai in this sense as well. Samurai were kind of bygone examples of a far gone age. When you compare kind of that kind of traditional style. I said I know that they didn't just fight with swords. I know they reverted to melee weapons. I think they still trained with melee weapons, sword, naginata and stuff like that, as part of their kind of martial training, I believe. But at this time, the samurai, all Japanese, were essentially using some sort of firearm. I mean, Oda Nobunaga, if I pronounced that right, during the Sengoku Jidai and stuff like that, were kind of using primitive firearms, like matchlocks and things like that. There was also several Japanese that kind of made contact with Portuguese, and they also traded in their firearms. So samurai was certainly still used to using guns, but I think the idyllic kind of way when you think of samurai is you think somebody dressed in that armor with a katana or some sort of bladed weapon is kind of that, it's what everyone thinks about. The same way as when you say knight, you think steel plate and you think of, like a lance astride a horse or something like that. But that's been Shiroyama. As I said, apologies that I couldn't add more to it than I probably wanted to, but I will check out the Sabaton history video to learn more about this event, to learn more about the people involved in this, and to learn more about Saigo. And I hope you guys come along for the journey with me. Thank you ever so much for watching, and please stay safe. Thank you. Bye-bye.